Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the EU Green Week partner event, looking at the role of EU protein crops in reaching the Green Deal goals. My name is Amrit Nanda, and I will be your moderator today. I am the executive manager of the European technology platform Plants for the Future. We are basically a multi-stakeholder platform representing the plant sector. And we basically represent stakeholders from basic research to crop production and distribution, with members from academia, the farming community, and industry, mostly the seed and breeding sector, but also agricultural service providers. So for those of you that aren't familiar with what we do, in a nutshell, our mission is to bring the stakeholders together and develop a common vision for the future of the plant sector. And we basically do that by agreeing on where we want to be in 10, 20, 30 years from now, for example. And then we provide strategic research direction for the research and innovation to get there. We do that by identifying challenges, bottlenecks, but also opportunities and potential solutions, and looking at what kind of research is needed to develop these solutions. And most importantly, we also promote science-based policymaking, because without an innovation-friendly policy environment, society cannot fully benefit from research outcomes. So today, in the context of I'll just share this slide here. There. So today, in the context of today's webinar, we will be focusing on a topic that's very close to our hearts here at Plant ETP, which are protein crops. So it's a topic that's extremely relevant for us and around which we have conducted many activities in the past. It's also a topic that is receiving a lot of interest right now, initially triggered by the EU Green Deal's Farm to Fork strategy in a few years, 2 years ago, starting 2 years ago. And also more recently in the call for several member states for an EU protein strategy to be developed and to basically reduce EU's dependency on imported protein. And now more urgently in the context of the impact of the war in Ukraine and the shortages of protein crops that this has led to, particularly for feed. So today we have gathered for our discussion some really great speakers to look at the state of the art of EU protein crops and what they could contribute to the Green Deal goals in terms of increasing the sustainability of our agricultural and food systems. So each speaker here represents a piece of the agricultural value chain. We don't have the entire chain, but we have the upstream part, and they will each share their views looking at policy, science and research, looking at the seed and breeding sector, and also from the farmer's perspective. So we will start with a state of the art from the policy side, looking at EU initiatives to promote protein crops in the EU, followed by the scientific perspective, taking a systems approach to protein crops. Then we will hear from our representatives from the seed and breeding sector and the farming community, respectively, before we go into a panel discussion and the Q&A. So please ask your questions using the Q&A function, not the chat. You also have the option to, or should have the option to up or down vote each other's questions. So we have allotted, as you can see, quite a bit of time for the Q&A. But of course, if we run late, we will not be able to take all the questions. So we will address them in order of popularity. So make sure to get to the most interesting parts. So to start this webinar today, I will hand the floor to our first speaker, Laurent Mercier from DG AGRI of the European Commission. So Laurent has a background as a lawyer and a computer scientist, which is a nice mix, very interesting. So he has been working at DG AGRI for 28 years now. He has some previous experience in the department for the promotion of European agricultural products and foodstuffs. That's given him a very good understanding of the drives for changing consumer dietary habits, which is very relevant when we talk about plant proteins. He joined the cereal team in March of last year and is now responsible for the follow-up on protein crops and plant-based proteins in general. So I will stop sharing now and I will hand it on to you, Laurent.
Thank you very much, Amrit, and hello, everybody. I'm just sharing my screen now. Yes, here it is. I think you will see it very soon.
Yes, perfect.
Good, excellent. So, as Amrit said, I've been asked to present you today the state of the art of EU plant proteins, and I will also take the opportunity to present you some highlight on Commission's work on plant proteins. You know, the issue of EU protein deficit is widely known, and even before the Green Deal, and the Commission is working on this topic for a few years. Already in 2018, the Commission presented a report on the development of EU plant proteins in the EU, and we are still in the process of implementing some actions that were detailed in that plan, and we will show what we have done since then. So I will start. Here it is. Yes, I will start with a very simple question. What are protein crops? And even if the question is simple, the answer is not that simple. In fact, all the plants contains, as you know, proteins, cereals between 8 to 12%, sunflower seed 15%, which is a bit more, rapeseed around 19%, and pulses between 22 and 35%, soya being 33%. Of course, we all know that the nutritional value of the proteins does not depend only, you know, on the content of protein. It depends on the nature of the amino acid in the plant, the digestibility, the nutritional factors. So just focusing on the proteins, protein content, is not enough. However, as I said, the question is simple, and in the EU law, you don't find any definition of, sorry, I just changed the screen, sorry. In the EU law, you don't find a definition of what are protein crops, not in the CMO, nor in the CAP strategic plan rules. Obviously, legumes, which are nitrogen fixing crops, are protein crops. Same for soybean. As such, oil seeds like sunflower seeds or rapeseed are not nitrogen fixing crops. Therefore, they could not be considered as protein crops, but meals made of those seeds have a high protein content, and therefore they play an important role in the challenge of the EU dependency as regards imported plant-based proteins. In the graph here, you see that pulses in black here represents a minor crop. Same for soya. Altogether, they represent 2% of EU crops. Let's have a look to the next slide. Why are protein crops high in the agenda? Because we need them to feed our livestock. That's why we are talking about them so often. And we are dependent on imported plant-based protein used for feed, in particular soya from South America. The graph here describes the level of crude protein used for feeding our livestock in the EU. Those data will come from EU feed protein balance sheet that I will present later. You see at the left side that roughage is the main source of livestock. The good news is that it is in green, meaning that it comes from the EU. It has an EU origin, so we have no dependency on the main source, roughage. The second source of protein used for our livestock comes from cereals. Most of this cereal is produced in the EU, and you see below the zero a section blue, which corresponds to what is exported as a cereal. It is not cereal which are exported only for feed. Most of it is exported for food, for human consumption. However, you see it is much bigger than the orange part, which is the cereal we export for feed. Therefore, we can see that for cereals, even we export and import altogether, there are no dependency on cereals. The problems is now on the third column on soybean meal. There, obviously, most of it is imported. And why is it, in fact, a problem to have imported plant-based protein? For two reasons. Because it comes from region where soya is participating to deforestation. And we want to avoid that our consumption contributes to negative environmental consequences in third countries. And the second reason, and it's quite vivid now, in case of political crisis, it creates a problem of food security. We'll see it with the next speakers that there is also a way to improve the sustainability of EU food chain through better use or better development of plant proteins. A small focus now on pulses, and which are obviously the most obvious protein crop. And I would just show you this table to insist on the food part and the animal feed part for pulses. You see that for some pulses, quite some quantity is used for feeding animal, and for others like lentils and chickpeas, for instance, it's only used for human consumption. I would say the negative aspect of that is that a big share of those products is imported, and probably the EU has to improve the situation there also. And is the situation improving? That's also an important question over the last decade. In fact, if you see here the evolution of the production of field peas, broad beans, lupins, and soy over the last 2 decades, and we see that there was a decrease of consumption of area planted for those plants between 2005 and 2018, and then an increase from 2014 to 2017. So altogether, the situation is not degrading. It is slightly improving, but not dramatically, you know. And before presenting the Commission initiative in that area, let me talk a bit about the Green Deal and the link with the problem we are discussing today. The Green Deal, which was presented in 2019 in December, is basically a roadmap with actions on the efficient use of resource. It aims at making Europe climate neutral and protecting our natural habitat. The Green Deal includes many topics and actions, among which agriculture, you see the red arrow, and in particular, it refers to the Farm to Fork strategy that was presented in May 2020. Even though the word protein crops or plant protein is not does not appear very often in the Green Deal and in the Farm to Fork, those strategy creates a favorable context for the development of plant proteins. The Farm to Fork set ambitious targets in this respect, in particular, a significant reduction of fertilizer by at least 20% by 2030, and a reduction of nutrient losses by at least 50%. And also the Farm to Fork plans to boost organic production with organic farming that would reach by 2030 25% of agricultural land. In March 2021, the Commission presented as regard this organic objective and its action plan. And this plan also does not mention specifically targets for plant proteins, but it will reinforce this favorable environment for the development of those plants. For instance, the restriction of the use of artificial fertilizer, and in particular the prohibition of the use of manual nitrogen fertilizer, will imply more crop rotation and cultivation of protein crops, which are, of course, as we discussed, nitrogen fixing plants. here is now the list of actions that was presented in the 2018 report. And there were 5 areas of actions that you see here. First, an action as regards the CAP strategic plan linked to the new reform, CAP reform. And then there were actions, and we have a look at them on the market analysis and transparency, actions on research innovation, promoting the benefits of plant proteins and knowledge exchange. Have a quick look now to the CAP reform and the CAP strategic plan. Very shortly, compared to the existing PAC, the new CAP, the new CAP changed the approach. It is based on what we call the new delivery model. And given the regional differences in terms of climate, soil, farm structure, or structural organization, a one-size-fits-all approach at EU level would not work. Therefore, now at EU level, there are some specific objectives which are defined, 9+1, common indicators, and the type of interventions are defined. But at member states level, based on a SWOT analysis, the needs will be described and the intervention will be defined in what we call CAP strategic plan. Those plans have already been submitted at the beginning of this year to the European Commission. For the moment, we are assessing them. There have been already a couple of comments that have been sent by the Commission to member states, and they are accessible on the Commission website. When defining the CAP strategic plan, member states were asked to take into account the farm-to-fork objectives, and we make comments now for the moment related to also to the farm-to-fork objective. In particular, reduction of fertilizer and nutrient loss. Let's have a look now to the tools that were presented that are available under the new CAP reform. And those tools could be used as a real support for the development of protein crops. The first tool I would like to mention are operational programs. This is a new type of programs which is based on the programs for fruit and vegetable. The idea is to allow producer organization to propose a program for promoting its sector. And those, the actions under those programs are the type of investments, to develop the economical competitiveness of the sector, but also actions for the environment and the climate, and also crisis and prevention and risk management actions. This tool hasn't been used a lot, to be honest, in the CAP plan we received. And until now, only France, use this tool for protein crops. It has been used for some other sectors, a bit for potato, but for protein crops, mainly France has used it. That's a bit of a frustration because, as you probably know, one of the big weaknesses of protein crop sector is the value chain that need to be developed, and those kind of tools, which are really trying to reinforce the first stage of the value chain, the producing part, would be very and organizing this part would be very helpful. There are also some specific support under the rural development that could benefit to the plant sectors, plant protein sectors, and also the new eco schemes that would reward environmental, practices, for instance, crop rotation, could also be used in the CAP strategic plan, and they are actually used, and sometimes in quite innovative way, putting some conditions which are, I think, very relevant, like compulsory on-farm production for the feed, and that kind of tools are also interesting and to be considered. And of course, the there is the couple income support that would replace the voluntary couple support, and then the advantages given to protein crops, the existing advantage will go on under the new mechanism, plus additional improvement in terms of mixed crops. And so I think there have been some improvement really to the tools that will be for the benefit of the protein crop sector. Market analysis and transparency. Since 2018, we developed a crop market observatory, which is used for all the sectors, including the protein crops. You would find there interesting information for protein crop sector. We had also initiative to request member states some more information on the market, in particular prices, which are applicable since the 1st of January 2021. We are still trying to improve, the quality and the quantity of data received for protein crop prices. And then there is this effort, this proposal of the Commission to review the regulation statistics on agricultural input and output. By the way, today it's I think it's the D-Day where the trilogue will meet to close the discussion for this regulation. And there, in the Commission's proposal, there are really a couple of information that we would request, and statistical information, and that would improve the market transparency. And then there is an important tool that was developed by my predecessor, very, quite impressive work, which is a collaborative work with the sector also. That's the EU feed protein balance sheet. It takes that form, and it is accessible on the link below. Probably if you Google, you will find it easily. And it's a Excel sheet. We have one sheet per year, and then for each of the crops, you would see in production, imports, exports, and all those figures, but also a conversion in terms of crude protein. And you would find for each product, I say crop, but it also covers, non-plant sources and roughage. For all those products, you would find what is the use in the EU and what is the origin, the EU origin for that use. And you'd find it at a very detailed level. So for each of the products. So I advise you to have a look at it. I use it to prepare this presentation, and I'm sure you will. You could also use it for your own activity. Another actions that were important, that's research and innovation. And the new Horizon Europe. There are 3 research and innovation projects that were already selected for the period 2021 for a total amount of 23 million euro. Under the previous, research work program, Horizon 2020, there were also a couple of projects dedicated to protein crops, and I think some panelists were part of those projects. And so the Commission is also, investing in those in this sector through those projects, and those projects will cover, the food and the feed value chain. It will also concern the breeding sector, and so that's quite a wide range of activity. Also, the Commission is investing in research innovation through rural development programs. The 4th field of action is the promotion of the benefits of plant proteins. And this is quite important because many people, and the right thing, that a simple solution to reduce our dependency on imported plant-based is simply to reduce the EU livestock, which is, that could work, except that you would postpone the problem, because if you just simply reduce the livestock, if by miracle the Commission or the EU would adopt some subsidy to stop livestock production, and if it would be successful, if the simple reduction of the livestock would imply, in fact, imports of similar quantity of livestock if the diet of the consumer doesn't change. So basically, the first thing to do in the process is probably to follow the recommendation of the Farm to Fork and to change the consumption pattern to a more plant-based diet with less red meat and processed meat and more fruit and vegetable, to quote the Farm to Fork. So to do that, this tool of promotion, the EU promotion, is certainly a key tool. And of course, all the actions in the domain are really essential. And that's why the Farm to Fork is currently, or request to review the promotion policy. That's what we are in the process to review it. The Commission will probably present very soon its proposal for a new promotion policy at EU level. I cannot tell you the content of the new policy because it hasn't been adopted by the Commission yet. However, I can tell you that we insisted that plant-based protein drinks and food would be present or would be eligible for this promotion. In the past, there was a gray zone and lots of discussion to know to what extent those products could be subsidized through this promotion mechanism. But now in the future, that will be the case. Another important thing also about this promotion, as we've seen before, some products, some pulses used mostly or only for food, like lentils and chickpeas, are in proportion, a big portion of them are imported, and sometimes the majority of them is imported in the case of lentils. So when you promote a product like lentils in the EU in those generic campaigns, you also promote mostly product from third country. That's a bit probably frustrating. And so we also try to work on that and to provide some tools to really try to focus our promotion on EU production for those products. But the knowledge exchange, sorry, indeed, there's been some seminar organized by the Commission in 2019. There was an important one, you know, in Vienna, and also another one in Helsinki, and it will continue in this area. And we are of course participating in those webinars, but also we try to develop a platform or to use existing platform to reinforce this knowledge exchange. Sorry. But the Commission is not the only actor, or the EU, to be deeply involved in the development of plant-based proteins. France, for instance, adopted a plan as for this objective, and this plan aims to increase the production of protein crops, and it will rely a lot on crop rotation, but also on investment through producer organization, innovation, lots of research also, and you can see the detail of this plan, you know, on the French website probably. Netherlands also published a national protein strategy, and there it's interesting to see that the approach is a bit different, because Netherlands has a more limited quantity of available arable land. Therefore, they focus a lot on alternative proteins. Of course, they still use those tools like rotation, and but it's more technologically influenced, which is not very surprising, as if you know a bit the Dutch agriculture. Belgium also proposed a plan, two plans in fact, one for Flanders and one for Wallonia. They are both inspired by Netherlands and France in terms of approach. Germany, I talk about the others, they also made a plan a couple of years ago, and recently they developed a similar balance sheet as the one I presented to you, but for Germany. So that's a German protein feed balance sheet. Very interesting, and would be so happy that if other member states would do the same, it would really allow us to follow the evolution of this challenge. Ireland also developed some specific actions, so and many others. I will hurry a bit. I think I'm not in advance. What's next? In fact, in its recent communication, food security, the Commission announced its intention to review the policy and priorities identified in the 2018 report. Now, the big question is what will be the form of this review, communication or report that we don't know. What would be the scope? It is still under discussion. So would it be like the 2018 report, focusing mostly on protein-rich plants, or on all the scope of the protein, plants or even alternative proteins? That's still also under discussion, and the timing to be defined. So we know very little bit for the moment, and it will be, but you will know more in the future. I'm sure about that. Also, as regard other initiative, we revise the rules on processed animal protein, and we are in the process to review the rules as regard food additive. And then also, for your information, we will launch this month, in a couple of days, a new study to identify the opportunities and limitation for diversifying feed source in Europe. In fact, we discussing with the stakeholders, we have identified that there are some region in Europe where there could be really a quick improvement of the dependency of that region on imported proteins, and this study will try to identify those regions for certain livestock, and to see how the improvement could take place, and of course it could be a showcase for other regions. That's the objective of this study. So I hope I correctly introduced the various challenges we are facing. I also hope I was clear enough when I explained what the Commission is doing and how it is doing that. And thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to hear your questions later in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laurent. That was really informative and really gives the whole picture of all the challenges and all the different initiatives that are out there. There was a comment in the Q&A just to highlight that Austria also has published a national protein strategy. Of course, you had the others, but yeah, there was a comment, because I think that one is quite recent and has received a lot of attention. So thank you very much for that presentation. We will now move on to our next speaker, Dr. Pete Agnetta, who will provide the research and science perspectives. So Pete leads the Ecological Food Systems subgroup of agroecology at the James Hutton Institute in Scotland. He is also an honorary lecturer at the University of Dundee. And Pete is basically a plant biologist and ecologist who studies the complex interactions which determine the sustainability of food and feed systems. So very relevant for the discussion today. So this effort includes developing novel crops, novel cropping systems, processing innovation, and the provision of extension services for value chain stakeholders, including policymakers. And his research is strongly focused on crop diversification and legume-supported systems from production to consumption. So we're really looking forward to your presentation here now. So go ahead, Pete.
Thank you, Amrit. I hope you can hear me okay, everybody.
Perfect. And we can see your slides.
Great. So good morning from the east coast of Scotland. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to you today. And also thank you very much, Laurent, for a great introduction. I enjoyed that very much. So my name's Pete Agnetta. I'm an agroecologist from the James Hutton Institute, and today I'll just outline some very brief perspectives on plant protein. I'll conclude with some breeding perspectives. So much of this talk will focus on context of and for breeding. These highlights will draw significantly from an EU-funded project called TRUE, which I had the honour to coordinate, but also drawn on information from other EU-funded projects and UK-funded projects too, which were legume focused. So it's worth highlighting, I think, as Lauren has already done, that the farm to fork strategy is at the heart of the Green Deal. And you can see here a summary of what the farm to fork strategy aims to achieve. And these are system-wide ambitions, and they'll demand system-wide interventions. That is, interventions will need implemented simultaneously. There's no silver bullet, I don't think, with the challenges that we're presented with. Also, this talk's been drafted as a resource for delegates to use after the event. Wherever you see orange text or an orange box around an image, these items present a link to online resources. Because I've only 15 minutes now, I really couldn't cover all the aspects in that time. So I could be mentioning many protein crops, as Lauren has already mentioned: wheat, barley, oilseed rape. But I'll be focusing almost entirely on legumes, and mainly because legume-based crop mutations can help achieve more sustainable production of these other non-legume crops too. And I'll be talking about forage and grain legume types, and I'll be talking at times with specific reference to the Scottish situation, just as an example, but I'm sure you'll find common elements in countries throughout the European Union. Taken together, the grain and forage legume types offer a very wide diversity of functions, both in agro ecosystems and across the value chain. Forage crops in particular, to me, look especially exciting due to the wide range of ecosystem benefits they may provide, not just as understories to other cash crops and other protein crops such as wheat, for example, but also with the advent of biorefining. They're also becoming increasingly important as biomass crops for various functions: carbon sequestration, anaerobic digestion. That use is controversial, of course, since this involves the use of feed or feedland for energy production. And I'm becoming very aware that there's more and more of competition in the feed, food, energy arena. Also, the competition for legume, the option, sorry, for legume forage protein to enter the human food chain is also becoming more obvious and apparent. I'll touch on this later. We've even had projects in Scotland where we've been using protein from gorse and broom, woody legumes, that has been developed into burgers for human consumption. So, on balance, legumes offer complex and multifunctional system level provisions and across whole value chains from farm and to fork. Legumes do not simply provide protein. I do get somewhat upset when legume protein is referred to as a meat substitute, for example. It's not. And what legumes provide to the system is not comparable. And I believe that legumes and legume-based products should stand apart in their own right. But you can see a list of ecosystem provisions here, from environmental and to nutrition and health. So we pose a question that you've probably all heard before, which is, what is there not to like about homegrown legumes? And we know, I think, most of the people here, that legumes are not cultivated yet at sufficient scale within Europe. So this is a diagram I've developed from Westerhoek's great paper. It's a paper I love referring to, called the protein puzzle. I've reinvented it here somewhat as what I call the legume puzzle and the legume paradox. Now, while some of the numbers here may have changed, little has altered actually since its publication. The issues have not changed. The puzzle, of course, is that we have interconnected food systems which suffer strong negative impacts from global trade drivers. There's a failure to meet local needs, both environmentally and nutritionally. And these issues are clear. The puzzle and the challenge is obvious. But the paradox is we have legume-supported feed and food systems already. But the potential environmental, biodiversity, human health benefits are forfeited through import dependencies. The legumes are not homegrown and they're not eaten. But I think the scene sent by Laurent to me is very optimistic and very hopeful for tackling some of those. And let's hope that's correct. I shall not dig deep into the details here. Laurent's already mentioned the EU feed balance sheet, I think, very, very well. And but let's be clear that the legume puzzle, as I call it, is also a synthetic nitrogen fertilizer use challenge. It's a protein grain global trade challenge as well. And secondly, in recent times, we've seen that the risks of higher levels of import dependency. The risks are posed by crop failure due to climate change, stochastic weather events, pandemics that can affect humans or farmed animals, socio-political unrest, as we are currently experiencing with the global trade impact of the Russian-Ukraine war. So, more questions. Why aren't we using them as a solution? Homegrown, legume-based feed and food systems. We need, I think, to look towards considering what level of fertilizer and protein independence is sensible. But how much legumes are enough? I'm going to draw upon a paper that we produced for the Legume Futures Project, which ran from 2011 to 15. And we did a meta-analysis of crop rotations across Europe. And we found that at 50% legume inclusion, which is an incredible amount of legume inclusion, in some of the rotations we studied, we found a peak in biological nitrogen fixation. Mineral or synthetic nitrogen fertilizer use was lowest, nitrogen input was greatest, and our output peaked. That's an incredible amount of legumes, but it was achieved generally at a balance, an equal balance of grain and forage legumes, 25% of each. Forage and cover crop use was common, and intercropping was common. And again, I get sometimes slightly annoyed when people say legume-supported systems are a threat to feed or food security. I don't believe that to be the case. In fact, I believe the opposite is the case, and that the opposite is a risk to feed and food security. We can, of course, select for better varieties. In Scotland, and like many countries across Europe, there's no formal legume breeding programme, particularly legume breeding for arable systems. And we're currently selecting from types that have been bred elsewhere. Some of the types we're looking at were bred over 40 years ago. And we select only for promising genotypes. Perhaps an exception here is this one variety that was bred by an ex-staff member from our institute and a hobby grower, which was a very early ripening faba bean. And that's a very important trait for Scotland and in other Northern European countries, is to have a very early ripening faba bean. We can also look towards use of elite rhizobia. These are rhizobia these are the organisms that underpin the biological nitrogen fixation. And there's certainly scope to improve those. This is just a small example of what we've been doing within the Institute. And we find that in the first 60 days of growth, we can have a 12-fold difference in biomass based on the rhizobia that we use. Now, should we be perhaps breeding for more responsive crops to these elite rhizobia types? And we're now working to see whether this early growth promotion can be translated to improve yields and yield qualities. And we're getting positive results, although they're not published yet. And we're particularly finding that these elite rhizobia work most effectively when they're deployed in an intercrop, less consistently when employed in a monocrop. It's also worth, I think, emphasising that the socioeconomic landscape is highly variable across the EU, and we have a particular challenge in Scotland. But one of our major industries is fish farming. which is something I think we would like to upscale across Europe. It's our second largest export, and the salmon are grown with a diet of up to 70% vegetable protein. And if Scotland was to grow just its own fava beans for fish farming, it would occupy 1/12 of our arable rotation. That would represent an 8-fold increase from where we are now. It would be a massive win, I think, for the environment, but also for sustainable protein production. But of course, there are challenges. The feed manufacturers demand very high levels of protein, above 50%. And it's very difficult for us to grow soybean in Scotland. So we're looking towards fava bean. We can, of course, increase the value of protein crops. The parts of many protein crops are worth far more than the whole. And here's just another example. And increasingly new capacities are being developed, both on and off farm. But here I show a process called air fractionation of pulses, and specifically of fava bean. The technology adds significant value to the protein crop. It generates grain components for particular processes and particular markets. Typically, the fractionated components were historically targeted to feed markets, but we're seeing more and more that there are challenges. The starch is not of particular value, and we need new markets for that. So it can go to pigs and poultry. There's great demand from aquaculture, and the hulls traditionally have gone to cattle and pet feeds, but I know that hulls are now being developed for human food. Equally, of course, the starch concentrate is also being developed for human food. So we're seeing some interesting competition emerge between the markets for available protein and also starch concentrates that also contain significant levels of protein. Another particular lock-in for Scotland is barley production. In Scotland, barley represents 2 of 3 crops which are grown in the arable system. The crop rotation on average is barley, something else. And that's great actually economically, because we have a very powerful drinks industry. It generates vast amounts of revenue. It's very important for jobs and for what we call Scotland the brand. So 1/3 of that barley is grown for beer and neutral spirit production. And therefore we are also testing disruptive approaches involving new and novel processes. Here using long established biorefining technology, namely specifically distilling. And I share here a case study from True concerning a short value chain of a farm-based distillery, where we, instead of taking wheat, took peas to make neutral spirit, which we've developed into the world's first climate positive gin and only climate positive vodka. So the LCA proved very effective. It was better in 12 out of 14 impact categories. In fact, the other 2, it wasn't very different. And because we can offset feed import, it's climate positive. But also we're experimenting now with beans and lentils in that process as well. And we're looking at the protein that is isolated in the waste material for human food production. But you can find more information online about this. It's a very interesting project, and it's received a lot of attention internationally. And farms like Arbiki have gone global with the product. They had no legumes on the farm. They're now 20% legume cover, and the demand is so great they're looking towards taking peas from other farms. So I know the distilling industry is looking at that with great interest. And if you're interested, there are some videos here for you to look at these disruptive approaches, this particular disruptive approach. In addition to neutral spirits, we can also biorefine pulses for other major industries such as beer making. And really, these are just mechanisms to concentrate proteins, again with high value co-products. And we've had some very successful forays into this. We've just submitted a paper on the beer-based LCA, and we're also looking at whether the waste products from that processing stream can also enter the food and feed markets. We've had some successful trials using co-products of bean-based beers in poultry production. And the beer itself is vegan and gluten-free and was sold in Lidl for a time. But the distilling and brewing examples show the importance of plant protein and co-products for major industries. So when it comes to global food security, we must also consider breeding and improved agronomy to ensure, I think, better use of legume grass pastures. Well, I agree with Laurent that we're self-sufficient in animal feed. The efficiency of the legume grass pastures, I think, can be increased. I would say in Scotland it could probably be increased by 50%. And that would, again, decrease demand for imports and reduce the flow of grains, even from homegrown proteins, from cereals and other based systems of that form. I don't see clover being deployed sufficiently broadly into existing grass pastures or even diverse swords. There should be more feed coming from byproducts and low opportunity cross marginal grasslands. And equally, as I mentioned already, the legume grass biorefining could open all sorts of possibilities. And there's a link here to a document that's provided to me by Eric Fogg, which I use quite extensively when I'm speaking to stakeholders. So closing considerations, where are we going with crop breeding? Are there national or regional protein crop breeding programs? At what scale are they? Who does them? And who do they serve? Even if protein crop breeding programs exist, what types of crop system are being bred for? Are we really breeding enough for organic, low input, integrated, minimum no-till systems, stockless rotations? Should we not be breeding in agroecological systems which incorporate low impact natural solutions? What about breeding for intercropping? More and more of the farmers, certainly I'm talking to within the UK, are really going big on intercropping, and I'm seeing them use 3 and 4 crop combinations now, particularly after the impacts of the Ukraine. And they're giving up the more innovative farmers are giving up very large parts of their farm to homegrown feed production. What attributes are we breeding for? Typically, we would breed for disease resistance and yield. But what of breeding for environmental provisions? Is the effort big enough in those areas? Soil mineralization rates, microbiome functions. I pose perhaps a controversial question: is breeding for animal nutrition compromising human nutritional provision? As we select out some of the polyphenols and other so-called anti-nutrients, but I wouldn't call them anti-nutrients, I'd call them non-nutritionals. So, and also we have now the emerging, are we breeding crops for these new emerging processing capacities, the biorefinery approaches? Are we breeding sufficiently with sufficient focus for the processing sectors? What starch and what protein attributes are preferred by these processing sectors, and what traits could be used for industrial non-feeding food uses? So they're just food for thought. So I'll stop there, but I'll highlight very quickly some last resources and reading material. I'd like to highlight these policy briefs that emerged from the TRUE project, and also hear some key papers from the TRUE project, but also links to key groups and organizations which you may wish to associate with. Some are highlighted in bold, as you may wish to read these as their positioning papers first. And also there's TRUE project delivery reports there. So here are my details and some of my current projects. But if people would like to get in touch with me, please do so. I'm always happy to speak. And of course, a final thanks to the project sponsors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pete. That was really, really interesting. And I like that, yeah, you ended a little bit with the possibility of using, or the value, rather, benefits of using protein crops for multiple purposes, which is something we talk a lot about at Plant ETP. What the future needs is multi-purpose crops, because we can't increase agricultural area. We're actually trying, or at least the EU would like to decrease it. So we need to do more with what we have and use more side streams and increase circularity. So that was very interesting. Thank you. I remind everyone you can pose your questions in the Q&A. You can, if you can, please specify who the question is aimed at. And also for information, I forgot to mention that in the beginning, all the slides will be provided to all the registrants. So you will get the slides with all the links and so on that were provided. So now we will move to our panelists. We have two panelists here today representing both the seed and breeding sector and the farming community. So we will start with Virginie Bortolussi, representing the seed and breeding sector. So Virginie is the seed program leader for canola and sunflower at Corteva Agri-Science, and also the chairperson of the Euroseeds Protein Task Force. So Euroseeds is an organization representing the European seed and breeding sector. So Virginie has spent a 20 years career working on raw crop seeds in different companies and regions. She joined Corteva in 2008 in her current role, and she's coordinating long-term projects for the full seeds portfolio in Europe and globally for canola and sunflower. In the Euroseeds Protein Task Force, she's chairing a group of professionals from very diverse seed companies, which objective is to form industry's position on the different EU initiatives and develop a horizontal view on the seed industry's concept of sustainable protein in line with those policies. So I will leave the floor to Virginie to provide her statement. Go ahead.
Thank you, Amrit, for the introduction. And if you allow me, I would share my screen. I just have one simple slide to share and be visual. Please tell me if you can see and if you can hear me well.
We can hear you very well. And yes, we can see perfectly. There, go ahead.
So thanks for the introduction and the opportunity to share with you today the breeder's insight on the Green Deal goals. As you can see on the slide, I will start with the value chain, although I'm representing the breeders, because some of you may have seen we had a position paper on protein in Euroseed and also a common one with Copa Cogeca and FEFAC, because we really do believe the sustainable protein production will be achieved thanks to a value chain endorsement of it. What does it mean? That means to have common, meaningful and aspirational targets, and we have with Farm to Fork and with 2030 having clear directions, and above all those targets to be feasible and sustainable from farm to fork. And farm to fork, that means the breeders, the farmers, the feed producers, I would add even the grain retailers and consumers. Why this? Because there are two factors to be combined for a sustainable protein production. It's the market push and the market pull. Market push is basically to have the breeders providing enough quality and quantity of seeds to the farmers to be enabled to produce those crops in good quantity and quality, also sustainably. And the market pull will be to have the endorsement from the value chain of those crops. So those crops are demanded, they are accepted, and they are able to be processed on the long run. Of course, that includes also the consumer. So the value chains are needing to be adapted to the consumer needs and the farming practices. There are many examples of successes on this. I would use the example of a failure just to explain why it is important. In France, in the early 2000s, they already identified that there was a need for protein production, and they put incentives, 15 million euro, to increase the soybean production in France. That has an immediate effect, and the hectares went up to 120,000 hectares. That was true success. But when the incentive and the subsidies disappeared, the hectares quickly went down to 20,000 hectares in 6 years. And it was because there was not this value chain complete engagement. So, and that's something that needs to be considered, of course, in the future policies, is to have this engagement and feasibility from the full value chain. Also to consider the different type of production. They were already, some were mentioned already by Mr. Mercier and Mr. Yaneta. There is not one easy solution on the protein production, having more protein in Europe, right? So the solution will come from combining different type of productions, big scale production and niche strategies. And when I put versus here, it's not to oppose them, but to say they are complementary. We will need both of them, but they're also addressing different needs. With big scale production, we are targeting the self-sufficiency on protein, right? Big scale production. If I refer to the feed balance that Mr. Mercier was mentioning, we're 76% self-sufficient in protein. We could say it's not too bad or not enough. But okay, if we're looking on the details, there are some crops that are doing well. The cereals, the grasses and the roughage, as it was mentioned. This is thanks to the effort actually that were already done by the breeders on those crops to improve the producibility, the adaptation, the local adaptation, and also the protein content for some crops. But where is the big gap? It's on the compound meal. And the compound meal, back to the comments in one of the very first slides that was presenting, it's the oil crops. So should the oil crops be included in protein crops? Maybe not called protein crops, I don't know, but at least be considered as part of the solution for the sustainable protein production in the future, definitely, because this is where you can gain volume. Just an example, there is a project in Europe to increase oilseed rape content by 20%. If this goes, so let's take this example. If we increase protein content of rapeseed by 20% at European level, what does it mean? That means if we're producing 3 million tons of crude protein today from rapeseed, that would mean 3.6. So 0.6, that doesn't seem much, but it is a lot in the balance. And for making a scale, this is 1.5 times the total EU production from soybean of EU crude protein. So, and this would be, so you were talking about dual purpose or multi-purpose crop. That means having still the oil, still having a crop that the farmers are knowing, not switching or mixing the crops or changing too much the schemes of the farmers, but improving the protein criteria without destroying something on the other side. The niche strategy, they are needed. Some were mentioned already by the speakers. They are addressing another need, which is a diversification. It can be an agronomic diversification. We're talking about rotation of the crops, for example. It can be also because of a specific need in terms of food or feed, and this is a demand from the market. So that's the two big scheme in general. I would just conclude my introduction by the breeding, of course. As I was mentioning, the breeders were really already working on the protein for long, and I would say even working on the Green Deal goals for a long time. We are the starting point of an adapted and optimized grain production because the seed is the beginning. It is critical that we have those goals, and just so some were mentioned, we are already working on yield, better yield, and I can tell you better yield with less fertilizer. That's even another level of challenge. Natural resistance to diseases, protein content digestibility, and I would add also that the requirements we are receiving from the market is, of course, to do this in a stable quality, stable quantity, safe and ideally cheap production, right? So that's the kind of criteria that we are already using in our breeding. Then to be more efficient and to really address the needs of the Green Deal and Farm to Fork, we would need really two key things. First is an EU-wide and consistent framework. This is critical when you're a breeder because we have a common market, we have a common registration system, and we really need this scale, this clarity at EU level. I would also add that this diversity is also helping us in the context of local adaptation. The other piece is the empowerment of research and innovation, having a clear and legal framework and having access to the best available breeding techniques. There are goals which are for 2030. 2030 for a breeder, it's tomorrow. And we really need those breeding techniques to be more agile faster and more intentional in our breeding. And also keeping in mind that it's not only that we have one target we are working on the multiple targets that I was mentioning before, because it's not having more protein at the expense of the yield or the disease resistance. It's trying to have varieties that are consistent and making sense on the market. And the other piece is, of course, investments. So support the investment in research and innovations for all the scale, for the big production and for the niches. The needs are different for those crops, but definitely breeding should be part of the discussion, should be included in the discussion, and should be supported also to enable reaching the Green Deal goals. So I hope that makes sense and that helps, and happy to answer any question or continue the discussion afterwards.
Thank you very much, Virginie, for giving a really nice overview of the needs, challenges, and so on, and the vision of the seed and breeding sector. So now, the best for last, we will then give the floor to our second panelist, Benjamin Lamer. So Benjamin is a farmer from the Alsace region in France. He is a trained agronomist who returned to the family farm in 2009 and produces soybean, wheat, and corn. Benjamin is really committed to defending his profession as farmers and participates in various union bodies from local to national level. He is the vice president of the National Federation of Oilseeds and Proteins Producers, and as such represents producers within the French interprofession of vegetable oils and proteins, Terre Univia, and is on the board of the Avril Group, which is an industrial group created over 30 years ago by French oilseed producers to better valorize their production. So we're really looking forward to hearing your views from the production perspectives, because we've gone a little bit down the value chain here, and so to see at the producer level what your views are on discussion. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Amrit. Good morning to all the participants. Yes, in fact, about the way to reach the goals of the Green Deal, I think that protein-rich plants are very good mean to reach these goals on several aspects. First of all, on the agronomic aspect, you know that in Europe, protein-rich plants represent only 5 to 10% of the rotation in the arable land, whereas in the rest of the world, it goes to up to 20% of the presence of this kind of crops in the rotation. And this should be the goal we should have in mind. Why? Because agronomically, it reduces the use of nitrogen fertilizers, and that is one of the goals of the Green Deal and the Farm strategy. By the use of legumes that fix the nitrogen of the atmosphere. The other point is diversifying the rotation. You also have the possibility of reduce the use of pesticides, and this is also a big issue for us farmers and for the whole community and the legislator community, but also for consumers and for the business. So these are the two big agronomical goals we can reach with legumes and protein-rich plants. Another one is about biodiversity, because increasing the number of species in the fields, you increase also the biodiversity in the fields and the support for biodiversity of insects, animals, other plants, and so on. So it introduces more biodiversity in the fields. Also, I have to mention that, for instance, in France, 40% of the production of honey is due to the blowing of rapeseed early in the season in the spring, when it's quite the only flora available for the bees that are coming out of the winter period, that is quite a period of lack of pollen and of nectar for the bees. So for biodiversity, it's also an impact for a pollinizator, quite huge, the presence of this kind of plants. On the impacts on climate, on the GHG emissions, also there is a lot of things to do with this kind of plants. First of all, the reduction of nitrogen fertilizer use conducts to the reduction of emission due to agriculture. And this is a big point, I think. Also, you have plants like rapeseed that are storing a lot of carbon in the soils. So it's compensating a lot of emission also. About the imported deforestation, there is also a big issue. We mentioned it. The fact of producing proteins on European soil is better for the planet than to import rich matter of protein coming from abroad with the risk of deforestation. So the impact of GHG is quite important. And also another co-effect, agronomical co-effect, is the better structuration of the soils by using these crops, and a reduced use of tillage and a reduced consumptions of fuel to make run the engines on the fuel. So these impacts are quite interesting to reach the goals, but to reach these goals, there are certain conditions of success, and I can testimony about the experience we have in France with the protein plant we have. We had several protein plants in France in 40 years. We are now at a self-sufficiency on a rich matter of protein of 45% in France. That is 10 points higher than in the average in Europe. And we want to reach 55% till 2030. So to better for 10 points, sorry, this self-sufficiency. To do that, we need first of all means of production. The problem with these protein plants is that there are minor crops, and as such, you have less means of production for this kind of crops, less research on the seeds, less phytopharmaceutics and chemicals solution. So we have to preserve the capacity to cultivate this crop by preserving the means of production for this crop. This is quite important. We have also the obligation to improve the productivity of this plant by using innovation in seeds, as you mentioned it, Virginie and Pete, by the use of NBTs. This is quite crucial for the future of these plants. Innovation also by the use of new technology with smart farming. For instance, on my farm, I can reduce to 20% the use of N fertilizers by using connected technology with GPS and soil cartography and so on. So this necessitates a lot of knowledge and innovation and studies, and that is also the point. We need a lot of innovation to increase the productivity. We have solution coming in the coming year, but we have big efforts to make to concretize these solutions. For instance, in France, we are developing a robust rapeseed cultivation, that is to say, with less use of pesticides, by using functional biodiversity, by using more agronomy, by using more rotations, and we are improving the way of producing rapeseeds also in this way. We need also progress on the side of biocontrols in this kind of innovation. The third point about these success factors is the organization of the value chain. We have to have consumers that pay the right price of our products, because our products are different. And non-deforesting, non-GM soy produced on the European soil is a bit expensiver than the soy coming from South America, for instance. And products including this kind of soy have to be valorized to a better price, and this is also a key of success. We have also to organize all the value chain with investment for small batches of this kind of cultures. We are minor cultures, minor crops, so we need adapted infrastructure of storage, manutention, and for all the logistic chain, we need also investment to correspond to the size of these small batches. You mentioned, Laurent, the fact that European Union wants to promote protein for the human consumption, vegetable protein for the human consumptions. We agree with that because it's a way of the future, but we don't have to. We have to keep in mind that for the livestock and for the breeding sector, it's a quite big transition, and we have to accompany this transition, not only let them aside, but really have the good rhythm and cadence to make this transition with the livestock sector. So I think this condition of success, we have some positive signal coming from Brussels at this stage, but we don't have a strong established strategy led by Brussels. At this moment, only national strategies are developed. I think we have to mutualize at the European level the experiences of the various countries, but also construct a real strategic plan for protein at the European level to mobilize investment, innovation, all the key factors of success I've mentioned to reach the goals. And doing that, we will improve the sustainability of our value chains of the proteins, and we'll be able to reach the goals of the Green Deal strategy and the Farm to Fork strategy.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. Really nice to get the perspective at the production level and to hear your recommendations as well that are very relevant and complementary to what was already said. So we will go into our panel discussion here. I'll move into a gallery mode. So first, I'd like to hear if anybody would like to reflect on what was said by the other speakers and add on to that. For example, Benjamin, you mentioned what Laurent was saying about livestock, reducing livestock and so on in the EU. I don't know, Laurent, if you would like to react to that.
I would be very pleased. And also, I think there is an interesting question on the promotion that could be a bit linked, because the question on the promotion is what about limiting, advertising for non-sustainable products? And in fact, indeed, the transition, as Benjamin mentioned, I mean, it will in any case not happen in one day, and it will start from the consumer, and probably this is a process where circularity should, also take place. The labeling of environmental, allegation also is also a key aspect. I think there is for the moment, sorry, initiative of the Commission, which is under preparation to put some rules on the environmental allegation, and based on that, probably that this transition, if it takes place, would go we would never end. The final goal is not to suppress or to completely quit meat for some specific consumer, not at all. I think the purpose is to move to a more sustainable livestock value chain and sector. And as regards also the question in the Q&A, indeed there are discussions on should we allow promotion of meat in the EU promotion. This is, I mean, the proposal of the Commission has not yet been published, so I cannot tell you what will be the result. In the Farm to Fork, however, it says that the promotion should still be possible, but it should insist on the sustainable aspects of the livestock sector. So probably, if you promote organic, farming, which are more sustainable for the environment, that implies less fertilizer, and that's certainly that would be certainly a way to go in the direction that we mentioned. But again, there I don't know what would be the final result of the discussion on what would be the Commission proposal on that.
Thank you for that, Laurent. Yes, indeed, you're referring to the EU Sustainable Food Systems Initiative that the Commission is currently looking into, which would increase, which will include defining ways to measure sustainability and the potential sustainability labeling system, which is still, still very early stages. Would anybody like to react here? No, then we'll go. So Laurent, thank you. You've already answered Chloe's question about the advertising of non-sustainable products, and we have two questions here from Cesar Gonzalez. So I'll take the one for Pete first. So you mentioned organic farming and how plant proteins could potentially contribute there to the increase of area for organic farming. So the question is, if organic arable land in Europe, excluding permanent pastures and permanent crops, is around 5%, wouldn't it make more sense to focus on protein breeding for conventional farming?
So yeah, thanks very much, Cesar, for that question. It's a good question. It's a good discussion point question. If I was being very brief, I would say firstly, no. But conventional farming is very different depending on where you are in Europe. What you might regard as conventional might be very different to what I would regard as conventional. But certainly conventional farming, we know at the moment, has particular issues. Benjamin's already mentioned them: fertilizer overuse, pesticide overuse, soil quality degrading, yields plateauing and even declining, even with elite varieties. So, conventional farming, I don't believe has a future. High input farming. We can see the systems that are the future. They are the intercrop systems, they are the low input systems, they are those that aim primarily to preserve soil qualities and soil functions and minimize waste and to minimize dependencies. So what I emphasize here, though, is it's interesting, organic, it relates to the question that Laurent's already fielded. Organic, 95% of the holdings have animals in them. They're an important source of fertilizer as well as a provision of meat. So when it comes to more diverse mixed systems, arable certainly has that. And even if we do reduce meat consumption in Europe, global demand is set to increase. So I still think there will be market demand globally for meat. So I think it's really important that we grow meat as sustainably as possible. And then we're into the items that have already been mentioned about the need to account carbon farms at the farm level, but also there needs to be more detail about the rotations. So you can account a farm, at the farm level to see if it's the extent to which it's carbon neutral. But that doesn't really say much about the rotations and the nature of the management within the farm. So while I welcome some of these tools, I think we need more resolution. And I know that some of the new EU projects are looking towards defining in more detail some of the ecosystem services beyond that high level accounting. So I'd welcome that. But can I just mention as well, it was great to hear what Benjamin said about his 20% reduction just through careful management. He's not operating a conventional system if he's relying on all these technologies to support him, and that's great. We have a system in the James Hutton Institute. It's a long-term rotation. It's been going for about 15 years. It's not organic, but it heads towards organic. I don't know where the EU sits. It's maybe a question for Laurent with regard to integrated farming, because I see integrated farming as a really important way to transition towards organic. I don't see integrated farming getting sufficient attention, but we can maintain in our Centre for Sustainable Cropping conventional level yields with 60% less fertilizer. So I feel we should be breeding for these systems of the future. So of course, we're not food dictators. If somebody wishes to put their money into breeding for conventional systems, they're welcome to do so. I feel that would be money misspent, and we should be breeding for the systems of the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Pete. Yes, I think you're right. It depends how you define conventional, because I think from a more European perspective or EU perspective, conventional is anything that's not organic, because organic has a set label, and then there's a few other. So conventional, at least how I would have viewed it, would have been, yeah, anything that wasn't organic, which would include agroecology or integrated farming and so on. But it's, yeah, I think how you see it is at the more industrial farming, perhaps, and these new types of farming, agroecology, integrative, maybe even regenerative farming would be slightly different. But it's, yeah, very interesting. I think, Virginie, you wanted to bounce off on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Amrit. But I think, in fact, you phrased what I was willing to say. It's also, I like the discussion about the sustainability goals and having targets on being more sustainable, being intentional, and that's a clear direction. I have really see it as positive direction. Just wants to be cautious not to have a black and white vision. Organic is good and the rest is bad, right? It's not really like this. And I think in Europe in particular, we are really, our farmers, and maybe Benjamin is better placed than me to speak about this, but we have farmers that are really taking care of their land. They are owner of their lands. They are really looking for long-term management. And I think there is a space for both. I mean, again, like I was saying before, between the niches and the big scales, there is a space for organic and there is a space for conventional. And again, conventional is also something that we need still to make the expected level of productions and the quality. So just I would share not to, at least at our level, we're cautious not to oppose the two. I think the sustainable approach is much more meaningful to us.
Thank you, Virginie. And Benjamin, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to add that yield is an issue in conventional farming, because first of all, it's a question of economical rentability for the farmers to reach a certain level of yield, to be competitive and to be able to finance all the EU norms and regulations we have in comparison with the imported production. So yield is an issue for that. And also it's an issue to reach a better yield by using less factors of productions and by optimizing the factors of productions. So the research on seeds can help us to reach also these goals. So it still remains an issue for us, also for organic farming, obviously, but for all the farmers, I think.
Thank you for that, Benjamin. So I will then move on to the second question that César had as well, which is aimed at Laurent. So he's asking, what is the room for maneuver within the current discussions on national strategic plans to incorporate operational programs that focus on protein value chains? Or has that ship sailed already? Is it too late to have that in there?
Indeed, certainly, I mean, I suspect it would be very difficult to completely change all the national CAP strategic plan to include a program. I would be surprised it would ever arrive. Legally speaking, I think there is still a possibility to do that now, but because the plans haven't been adopted yet, but I've doubt that it will take place, and also there would be a revision if I'm correct. But in any case, we have here a long-term problem and perhaps a long-term solution also, organizing better the sector and the value chain. So on the long run, I think the tool is still very relevant. I mean, long run after probably the present, CAP strategic plan, the duration of the present CAP strategic plan. In fact, the success was not there following me because it implies a transfer from the envelope of direct payment to those operational programs. Therefore, the member states have to decide to take money directly from the pocket of the farmer. That's basically that the direct payment to make investments in specific sectors, and sometimes it's difficult to sell this option. That should be taken into account when the next CAP strategic plan will be under discussion, certainly. And for the current one, indeed, the room of maneuver there is still some room of maneuver, but I've doubt that there will be a big change on that.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's interesting to see. So I see there are a few questions in the chat. Could you please put them in the Q&A so I don't have to bounce back and forth between the two? That would make it a bit easier. So please repeat the question in the Q&A and we'll look into that. I have a question here for Benjamin from Claudius Marondetse. So thank you for the introduction, and good to see that use of technology has been useful in achieving some of the farm to fork strategy goals. Is your view in the openness towards innovation a general trend among farmers, in particular on new breeding techniques, or how do consumers relate with products produced with such innovative technologies?
Yeah, among farmers, there is a big weight for new solutions addressing the new challenges of climate change and the better use of the production factors. So among the farming community, it's a big weight to have new solutions coming with the new breeding techniques. In the consumer view, there is no impact at this stage about how the consumer see it. We have some associations that want to qualify NBTs as GM techniques, but it's quite a fight, I would say, against, like we had in the past with GM, a fight against capitalism and let's say big firms. But technically, you can't qualify NBTs like GMs because they are quite different in the way they act. Also, in the new breeding techniques, I also include all the genomics, all the screening of the genes, the phenotypage, genotypage, and so on. So these also can help us to accelerate the adaptation of new varieties and to be more accurate in the selection. So we are really waiting for new solutions in this way.
Thank you, Benjamin. And maybe Virginie, you'd like to say a few words as we're talking about breeding and new breeding techniques.
And it's very diverse, right? The new breeding techniques, and some of them were mentioned. I think it's just to remind, this is very different from the GM. I mean, the GM is really introducing genes from a different species. Here we are talking about just using the genome of the plant, being more intentional, being more targeted, going faster in our process, the normal process we're using, and things that the plant is doing could do naturally, just having techniques to go faster and being more intentional. So I think the new breeding techniques are really the next step, the next boom that will help the breeders in Europe and elsewhere to be more efficient in their breeding, to go faster. And again, when we have goals, and I think again 2030 is tomorrow for a breeder. These new breeding techniques would be critical. The other piece is, and it was mentioned a bit, the new breeding techniques is very large adaptation. I mean, new breeding techniques today, they are very diverse and they are accessible to small company, big companies, academics. You see whatever it is, so gene editing or CRISPR, you see publication from very diverse size and type of companies. So it's also something that is much more developed. And so there is a true benefit for the overall breeders to have access to those technologies in Europe.
Thank you for that. So I have a question, or actually two questions here from Eva Mills. I think the first one is directed at you, Pete, asking about, so I'm not familiar with this term, what about the phenomenon of legume fatigue with high proportions of legumes in crop rotations? Do you see a need for research here? So are you familiar with this?
Yeah, it can come from many different things. But I think if you have a sufficient diversity of legumes and they're intercropped and their rotation is long, then legume fatigue is less likely to be an issue. But I do agree there's need for more research. People kind of thought that the Green Revolution had already happened, and I don't think it really has. We bred crops for higher yield under higher inputs, and there's been tremendous benefits from that. There's also been tremendous damage from that. So I think we need to be doing more systematic studies of crop nutrition for these future, more sustainable approaches to crop rotation. So I think we do need more research there, especially. I don't believe you get something for nothing either. So when we're having intercrops and the land equivalent ratio has gone up and we're yielding more per unit hectare, we're taking more from the ground too in terms of the pressure on the mineral nutrition that's there. So yes, I do think it's something to be cautious of. I think there's ways around it through circularity, but also having smart agriculture, as Benjamin said. But more research definitely help, particularly on crop nutrition. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Benjamin, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's not a big issue because having 5 to 10% of legumes in the rotation, you don't have a big pressure, and the rotation are long enough to avoid this kind of problem. When we will have 40% of legumes on the European soils, then the question will come, I think, but we are still not there.
Thank you. And so there's a second question from Eva, directed at you, Laurent. Will there be a European protein strategy in the foreseeable future, as recently called for by France and Austria, among others? And what are the next steps? So I think you touched a little bit on that in your presentation, but maybe you could elaborate a bit.
Yes, of course. To be honest, I don't know. It is possible. And indeed, in the framework of the revision of the 2018 report, perhaps the revision will take the form of a European strategy. However, the current approach is still, no EU strategy is still, I think, sensible in the sense that we rely more now on national strategies. And also, there are so many different EU strategies for the moment. And I think our aim is to use the best of those strategies. So adding an additional strategy, that could be, very interesting to gather the energy. So it's not excluded. But the other option of using, the different strategies and to be sure that there is something on protein crops on that, and trying to share the knowledge and between the different member states who are establishing strategies, or which are thinking on the challenge is also is also another approach. So I don't have an answer, and it is possible. That's my that's my answer.
Thank you. I get the feeling we'll know more in the maybe second half of this year whether something happens.
I hope so too.
Pete, you want to say something?
I'm just aware that there's a question from Petra in the chat. I don't know if you're aware of it.
Yes. So I was going to get to that, but yeah, we can take it now. So I think this is aimed at you, Laurent. I'm basically asking. So this is from Petra Yorash. Asking, did I understand correctly that organic farming is considered to be sustainable in any case, or will it be assessed in a similar manner as all other farming? Since sustainability is not environmental sustainability only, wouldn't it be essential that all farming food systems are assessed in a non-discriminatory manner? A little bit provocative, go ahead.
So I discovered a question because I didn't see it at the beginning of the chat, you know. So I guess there was this is also linked in a way to the discussion between conventional and organic farming we had at the beginning, and I would not perhaps answer immediately to that question, but just I also would like to reckon that saying that the the EU has developed some tools that reward practices which are not organic farming as such, in the form of eco schemes. And eco schemes, this is a set of tools which are designed by member states. I had the opportunity to see, you know, how they designed it. It is very interesting to see that the form of the eco schemes varies a lot from one member states to the other. And that's I think quite a good thing, you know. It's creative sometimes. They put some conditions linked to some practices. In any case, it should be more than the GAEC, you know, which is the standard, you know, conditionality, let's say. And so there is indeed certainly between the conventional farming, does it really exist, but basic one without any effort regarding the environment, but I'm not sure it does exist really, you know, knowing the GAEC conditionality, until, you know, organic or even more. There is a huge margin of options, and many of them are supported by the EU finance through this eco scheme system, which is designed by member states. So now I will read the question again, if you allow me. It takes some time to process, and I could come back to you on that.
Yes, of course. It's a lifelong question. Pete, do you want to have some thoughts on this?
Just, I think it's a very good question again from Petra, and I would agree with your sentiment here that we need independent measures. Certainly, we've done studies in Scotland where we've looked at the impacts both environmentally, in terms of biodiversity and production, across a large farm network of conventional, integrated and organic farms. And actually there was tremendous overlap between them all. And it would be very difficult for me to say that that every conventional farm would be more or less damaging than every organic farm, and whether every organic farm is, so it's very, very context dependent. And so I would certainly encourage any assessment tool to not get caught up in the particular agronomy or cropping system type, but actually to measure your system functions and to make decisions based on your system functions, however you choose to crop. Yeah.
If I may, I read the question peacefully, and and I would support, of course, what Pete said. And indeed, I don't have, you know, an answer in the CAP as such, but you remember that I referred, and you put the correct labeling on the initiative of Santé on the labeling on sustainable, you know, environmental, you know, allegation claims, and I guess this is also a tool that would allow to because organic is also a labeling issue, because you can only label if you follow those specifications. So this is basically a labeling issue, and the idea perhaps in that initiative would cover other practices which are environmentally friendly, and also I just would like to react to something that I just visited a month ago, a farm. Could we call that farm in Netherlands, where they have building with 10 stories, and there they grow plants without any natural light, without very limited amount of nutrient. Really limited, with no pesticide, and so to say, we are probably the most organic product that could exist. But the context where it is produced, of course, they say we could not ever get the label organic following this approach. So it's a very difficult question, because some products are really pesticide free and they are far from being organic. So it's quite a challenging question.
Thank you, Laurent, and thank you, Pete, for reflecting on that. And I agree, and I think the basically we hope this initiative will at least this initiative on sustainable food systems and looking at how to measure sustainability. It's still unclear whether that would be only environmental sustainability or also socioeconomic sustainability of products, but it will allow maybe a more gray scale instead of having a black and white of this is sustainable, this is not, but more appreciation for the grayness of the areas and the different processes, as Virginie had mentioned as well earlier. So I will now, unless there's anybody that has anything to say on this, I will move on to a question from Christian Brandt. So this might be aimed at Laurent, although if anyone else has some thoughts on this, you're welcome to come in. So what are your expectations for grown area development of protein crops, excluding oilseed rape, in 5 to 10 years perspective on EU level, given these crops will get a role in the CAP, and at the expense of which other crops?
It would be interesting personally that Benjamin would answer, knowing that he has some experience in choosing, and I would be very interested to know his answer. And also I have a question to him at the same time on the so you have to make a choice between the different crops that you are growing, including soy, and what are the criteria for this choice to increase or reduce the proportion of those crops, and is all the crops the same level of profitability or not, and then.
Yeah, I could testimony about what we are planning in France with our protein plan. The idea of this plant is to give more space to non-GM feed for the animals. Doing that, we are aiming certain segments of animal productions under label. Agronomic labeling, of course, but in France we also have other official signs of quality like AOP, IGP, and Label Rouge. And in this sector, we are thinking that consumer is able to pay a little bit more to have this guarantee of non-deforestation, non-GM, produced in France feed for the animals, and so on. And we made this plan in collaboration with the livestock sector. So for poultry, for pig, for beef, for milk, we had set objectives to that. And depending on that, you have more you need more rapeseed meals, sunflower meals, soybean meals, for these animals and for these uses. So on this basis, the idea is to develop the production of rapes, to maintain or to develop a little bit the production of rapeseed to 1.2, 1.3 million of hectares. We have 1 million at this stage. For sunflower, we want to go from 700,000 hectares to 800 to 900,000 hectares of sunflowers. For soybeans, we are at this stage at 160,000 hectares, and we want to reach 300 to 350,000 hectares. Peas and faba beans are also developing. We want also to develop lentils and chickpeas for the human consumption. On the whole, you will see, if you make the projection, you will see a little decrease of the production of wheat on the whole in France if we reach these objectives. But it's quite marginal, about 5% less wheat in France.
Thank you, Benjamin, for specifying this and also giving numbers and so on that are more tangible. So I think we have a few minutes left. So I will open up with a very nice question from Gis Klette, which is a little broader here. So this is addressed to all the panelists. What role do you think Africa could play in various respects, for example, as a supplier of deforestation-free beans, but also sharing knowledge and experience with legumes as meat alternatives and climate resilient crops? Any thoughts on that? Pete, yes?
I can set the ball rolling. Certainly, yes, from colleagues. I think clearly Africa is emerging as a major trading group of countries, and I'm mindful of particular colleagues, I better not say their names here, it wouldn't be fair to implicate them, who have said that they would perceive Africa as being a source, particularly of sustainable soybean in the future. But also, I know that they have many interesting systems, including agroforestry-based systems, which I'm sure would have some quite incredible life cycle analysis results from those sorts of platforms. What are they done? I don't believe there's enough data on those platforms in Africa. But yeah, the potential is definitely clear, and it's definitely there. And I know that already a number of countries are already moved into Africa for sources of protein crops.
Thank you, Pete. Anyone else? Yes,
yeah,
Laurent?
if I just may react, just to mention that there was a French initiative a couple of months ago to launch a discussion on the development of protein plants in Africa in collaboration with the African Union, and I think you can find probably some details of this initiative or searching also on the web. I attended the meeting, and what struck me is the fact the discussion were really to find the question was not at the technical level how it could be improved and the potential. It was more how to find partners to develop project at this stage, and that was the challenging part as far as I understood, But have a look to the.
Thank you. And Benjamin?
Yes, there are various subjects in Africa. In Northern Africa, in Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, for instance, there is an issue of dependency on the importation of oilseeds, and they are trying to develop rapeseed production to have less importation of soybeans, for instance, and also to have better rotations in their wheat in durum to increase the yields of the wheat also. And the other aspect, if you go to to other countries in Africa at the other side of the Sahara. There is some potential of export also of non-GM deforestation-free soybeans, for instance. So that it will be more a question of to have money for the pay by exportation, for the country by exportation. In North Africa, it will be more about sovereignty, the subject.
Thank you for that. That's very informative. And Virginie?
Yeah, thank you. Just on Africa, the potential of Africa is huge, right? I mean, we know this for a while, and just, I mean, it seems obvious, but just a reminder, Africa is both on northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere. There are tropical, continental, there are all types of climates. So the potential of crops to be developed there is enormous. So it's not a problem of kind of territories or anything. It's more a problem of infrastructure and getting varieties locally adapted. Many breeders are already working on this, local breeders, regional breeders, global breeders. Of course, not going potentially as far as the other regions, but very strong involvement from seed companies, associations, also to develop varieties adapted to the diverse conditions. And soybean is one, but again, there is a potential for many crops from Africa, but needs local adaptations. We're talking sometimes, so the first one that comes to my mind, of course, is drought tolerance and things like that, that needs to be tested locally, developed and so on, but a lot of potential for sure. And the other thing that is limiting sometimes, it's not so much agriculture, but it's infrastructure. So to move the seeds, to move the grain there, and it's also the part of the limit. But yeah, big potential.
Thank you for that, Virginie. Pete, one last word before I close.
Yeah, I know we're getting short of time, and it's not in relation to the Africa question. It's just really a comment that I'd like to make. It's probably targeted mainly towards Laurent. And it's great to see that there's an EU Sustainable Food System plan emerging. And obviously countries, European countries are moving towards developing their protein plans. But I guess as a cautionary comment, because we've seen time and time again policies conflict and trade off. And I feel an increasing need for better connection of the policies that are developed. And I wonder whether really the protein plan should be a subcomponent of the Sustainable Food Systems Plan, for example. But actually that the Sustainable Food Systems Plan, or maybe even a Sustainable Land Management Plan, you know, we need almost and I was very intrigued by Benjamin's comment regarding a framework at the EU level. I think that's a tremendous suggestion. If I looked at other countries like Canada and structures like Pulse Canada, where they have a clearly structured framework for investing in innovation and development across the industry, something like that for you know, for the EU would be good. And if that could be linked to a sustainable feed plan, that would be terrific. I just wondered if you might want to comment.
Thank you, Pete. Laurent, would you like to comment on this?
Just to say that indeed there are many people who are asking for this strategy, and I think it would really be relevant if we have enough courage to define targets. And that's otherwise it will, if we don't have targets, even which are not compulsory targets, which are just indicative targets, then it takes all its sense, I think. Otherwise it will be probably another strategy, but if we have targets and we have tools also to measure the evolution of those targets over the next couple of years, then I think it will be really valuable. So thanks for your suggestion and encouragement for developing that. And personally, you know, I would be very enthusiastic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laurent. Thank you, Pete. I completely agree with you and what was said earlier, that there needs to be some kind of EU-wide framework. This was also mentioned on Virginie as well as Benjamin. So really something of course, each member state is slightly different and has different setups, so different needs. But there should be some kind of coordination at some point at EU level. That would be ideal for the success. So I see we have, well, we're just right on time, so I won't make a big speech for the closing remarks, but I'd like to thank all the speakers for a really great presentation, statements, and discussion. I want to thank all the participants. I hope this was informative. I see it's dropping off a little bit now that we're out of time, but really thank you all for this. As I mentioned, we will be sharing the slides. We've also recorded the event, so this will be available on our website very soon, and also on our YouTube channel. The topic of plant protein is really relevant for us, and now with this new momentum, we, with our working group on sustainable agriculture, will be developing a roadmap on increasing plant protein production in Europe in the coming months, and we hope to have that published in the new year. So you will be hearing more from us on this topic if you are interested to follow through here. So thanks again to all the speakers, and I'll leave you here for now. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.